Today, I want to walk you through three stories. A company that almost died because of bad photos, an experiment that proves asking for too much can get you a yes, and the real reason hotels leave chocolate on your pillow. I read something a while back about a company that was 1,000 days from going broke, and the thing that saved them had nothing to do with their product. It had to do with a camera. The company was Airbnb, and before it was worth anything close to what it's worth today, it was two guys in San Francisco who couldn't make rent, renting out air mattresses on their living room floor. That part of the story everyone knows. What most people don't know is what happened next. For over a year after launching properly, Airbnb was dying. Slowly, quietly, the way most startups actually die. Not a dramatic collapse, just months of barely any bookings, barely any revenue, founders running out of savings and trying everything they could think of to get more traffic to the site. More traffic wasn't the problem. A mentor of theirs forced them to look at something they'd been avoiding. Not how many people were visiting the site. How many of those visitors actually booked anything? Almost none of them. So the founders did something most people in their position never would have. They looked at their own listings as if they were customers instead of creators. And they noticed something obvious in hindsight that they had somehow missed for over a year. The photos were terrible. Hosts were uploading blurry, badly lit pictures taken on early phone cameras. Apartments that were probably perfectly nice looked, on screen, like places you wouldn't trust to sleep in. They had no budget to fix this properly, so they did the least scalable thing imaginable. They flew to New York themselves, rented a real camera, and went door to door, one listing at a time, photographing apartments themselves. It took a week. It was slow. It made no sense as a long-term strategy for a company that was supposed to scale to millions of listings. Within that month, revenue from those specific listings doubled. Not increased. Doubled. Because it had never really been a marketing problem or a pricing problem or a growth problem, it was a trust problem. Nobody wants to hand their money to a stranger based on a blurry photo. The moment the photos looked real and professional, the fear dropped, and the bookings followed. I think about that story a lot because it's such an uncomfortable lesson. The thing that nearly killed Airbnb wasn't a flaw in the business model. It was something almost embarrassingly simple. And it took the founders going out and doing the unscalable manual thing themselves before they even saw it. Here's a story that has nothing to do with photos or trust. This one is about something far stranger. How asking for something ridiculous on purpose can make the real request you actually wanted feel almost impossible to refuse. In 1975, a psychologist named Robert Cialdini ran an experiment at Arizona State University that's been quoted in psychology textbooks ever since. His research assistants posed as employees of the county's juvenile detention center. They stopped random students walking across campus and asked if they'd be willing to volunteer, completely unpaid, as a chaperone for a group of juvenile delinquents on a day trip to the zoo. Almost nobody said yes. 83% refused outright. Which makes sense. That's a big, strange, slightly unsettling ask from a total stranger. But here's where it gets interesting. With a separate group of students, the same researchers came in with a much bigger ask first. Would you be willing to volunteer as an unpaid counselor at the juvenile detention center? A serious, ongoing commitment. Almost everyone said no to that too, obviously. But immediately after that refusal, the researcher would soften and ask the smaller, original request instead. Just the one-day zoo trip. 50% said yes. Compare that to the 17% who said yes when the zoo trip was the only thing asked, cold with no big request beforehand. Same final ask, same researcher, same day. 3 times more people agreed, purely because they'd said no to something bigger first. Psychologists call it the door-in-the-face technique, and the mechanism behind it is almost embarrassingly human. When you reject someone's first request, you feel a small flicker of guilt, even if the request was unreasonable. The second, smaller request gives you a way to resolve that guilt without much cost to you at all. It feels like a compromise. A fair trade, even though you were never under any real obligation in the first place. Charities have used a version of this for decades, asking for an enormous donation first, expecting the no, and following up almost immediately with the actual number they wanted all along. Negotiators use it constantly, open with an extreme position specifically so the real offer sounds reasonable by comparison. I've used a rougher version of this myself, without fully understanding why it worked, asking for something deliberately larger than what I actually needed first, just to watch the smaller real ask land far more easily right after. It works. It feels almost too simple to be real. But the data backs it up, over and over. Now here's a smaller story, but one I think about every single time I check into a hotel. Why does almost every decent hotel in the world leave a small chocolate on your pillow? It seems like such a tiny, throwaway gesture. A few cents of cost, easy to overlook entirely. But there's a body of research behind exactly this kind of small, unprompted gift and what it does to people psychologically. It's the same principle as the free sample, the free shoe, the free anything reciprocity. The moment someone gives you something, even something small, even something you didn't ask for, a quiet sense of obligation forms. Not loud, not conscious most of the time. Just there. A hotel that leaves a chocolate on your pillow isn't really spending money on chocolate. They're spending a few cents to create a small emotional debt, one that shows up later as a better review, a returning guest, a slightly more generous tip left for housekeeping, a recommendation to a friend. Hospitality industries have known this for decades, which is why the practice has barely changed. A few cents of product in exchange for a measurable shift in how warmly a guest remembers their stay. It's such a small thing that it's easy to dismiss as just a nice touch. But every one of these examples, the chocolate, the free sample, the photo, the zoo trip, points at the same underlying truth about people. We are far less rational than we think we are, and far more responsive to small, deliberate nudges than we'd like to admit. Three completely different stories. A camera, a fake request about a zoo trip, a chocolate on a pillow. None of them involve a clever new invention. None of them involve spending huge amounts of money. Airbnb didn't build new technology. The zoo trip researchers didn't offer anyone anything valuable. The hotel chocolate cost next to nothing. What all three have in common is that someone understood more precisely than their competitors did exactly how a human being actually makes a decision. Not how a rational actor in an economics textbook would, but how a real, slightly irrational, deeply social person actually responds to trust, guilt, and small gestures of generosity. Once you see that distinction, you start noticing it everywhere. In every business that quietly outperforms its competitors despite having a similar product, a similar price, and a similar pitch. The difference usually isn't the product. It's whether someone bothered to understand the person on the other end of the decision. If this changed how you'll look at a hotel pillow, a charity letter, or your own product photos, subscribe to The Corporate Mind. Every week I go inside the real stories and the psychology behind how the world's most successful businesses actually operate. I'll see you in the next one.